something doesn't change now. And that's why we created the private reserve account, a simple way for mainstream Americans to secure their retirement, protect their loved ones, and fund their dreams along the way. Here's how it works. Imagine creating your own banking alternative, and not just some ordinary bank, but the ultimate bank. Think about that for a minute. If it's your bank, what benefits would you give yourself? It would be a bank where your savings account actually grows by being linked to stock market gains, so you can benefit from those big rallies. And as your money grows, the gains are locked in, so no more of those scary drops. That's a win-win. You'd be able to access the growing value of your account anytime you want for any reason you have. No taxes, no qualifications, no questions asked. After all, it's your money. Oh, did we mention no taxes? And since it is your bank, you'd be earning the interest on the money you borrow from yourself while you pay yourself back. What? Let's keep going. You would have no early withdrawal penalties, unlimited contributions, and a college planning fund with no restrictions. When properly structured, your bank could pay off your mortgage in half the time, could provide living benefits for critical and terminal illness. And if something ever happened to you, your ultimate bank would be transferable to your heirs tax-free. Seems impossible, right? Nope. You just didn't know that the wealthy have been doing this for years. Now you're wondering, so why doesn't everyone open a private reserve account? Exactly. The real question is, why don't you? Contact your financial representative today to set up your private reserve account and help put a stop to America's retirement crisis. We're with you all the way.
I am Darrell R. Banks, two-star executive director and founding member of this incredible company called MWR Financial, and your host of this weekly Thursday night Financial University segment, where we bring you the expert for you to get this information you need to succeed on the other side of money. Guys, listen, we want you to be sure that you grab yourself a pen and a pad to take copious notes on the information you're going to hear tonight, because I tell you what, this is life-changing for you to understand how this account can accelerate your income, your wealth building process, guys. So again, all guests, please get back to the person who invited you. Now let's see what cities and states have joined us around the country. We got Miss Sonia Ross out of Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome. Now, typically we have people chiming in from all over the country. So, you know, yes, your local areas like Georgia, Texas, North Carolina, South Carolina, New York, Colorado, Nevada, and many, many more, even as far as California. So with that being said, just chime in, you'll click your location, and we'll set the stage for our MWR financial expert. We got Miss Lovely Sullivan out of Tampa, Florida. Welcome to the platform. Who else we have out there on the platform tonight? Again, as you people are still coming in, again, grab yourself a pen and pad. Get your active members on this platform tonight, because they need to hear the value of this exclusive invitation-only wealth membership and understand how they have access to this incredible, incredible platform. With that being said, let's go ahead and get started, guys. Listen, this gentleman I'm about to bring on to the stage, he has a wealth of knowledge in the expert of finances. He has been with us before and has shown us that you too can live and have just like an accredited investor. He is part of our department where we actually grow our wealth. No other than Mr. Cord Burner. Mr. Burner?
I'm here, Mr. Darrell. Can you hear me?
Man, I can hear you loud and clear. The platform is yours.
All right. Got to give you a shout out, my brother. Thank you so much for the energy. I mean, you guys really, for those that don't know, I get the pleasure of sitting in the backstage and, you know, talking back and forth with Mr. Darrell and Martina. These guys put a ton of energy into making this presentation tonight, to making the Thursday nights just be incredible. I mean, there's no technology hitches. They are amazing at what they do. My hat is off to you from a technology perspective. So thank you so much for your generosity, your time, and your expertise as you bring us on the stage. So guys, as we jump into it, let's talk about the private reserve account. That's really the topic at hand. And you know me, I like to talk about what's going on in the world. I like to talk about the cold, hard truth, what the media is not telling us. Or what they're telling us, but it's not really publicized. Have you ever noticed that the media does a really good job at, you know, promoting information that's divisive rather than things that are really relevant to us? Like, you know, well, the government, They were downgraded as a creditor recently this year. Most people don't know about that, but that would be some pretty critical information that you'd want to know. Why? Because when a country is downgraded as a creditor, that means that their financial standings, just like anybody else, it's weaker than it was the year prior. That's how they assess us, by the way. So the countries assess the same way as an individual. They look at debt to income, they look at liabilities, and they look at assets. And then they determine, well, based on the assets and the liabilities and the debt that the country currently holds, are they as strong financially as they were the year prior? And the answer is no. Well, how are you guys feeling about banks? Remember in 2007 and 8 when there were banks that were closing their doors left and right? It was like unreal. We hadn't seen that before. And now we're 12, 13 years beyond that. Well, what is it? 15 years, right? So we're quite a bit ahead of that now. And we've now got 5 banks this year that have went under. And 27 other financial institutions, banking institutions that are currently under review that have either been negatively rated or they've been downrated as an institution. These banks are massive, by the way. They're like, we've got regional institutions that's not like your mom and pop shops on the corner. These are institutions that have massive amounts. They've got a lot of assets, they've got a lot of liabilities. They're being negatively rated, which means that their liabilities can no longer be supported by their assets, right? They'd have to liquidate toxic investments that they have. They're negatively rated, meaning they don't have the assets to support their current debt holdings, which is insane. How many, news companies do you know that are talking about that? Well, how about debt as a whole? We're going to talk about the country where its debt's at because it's relevant and it matters. Tax rates are typically influenced by a country's debt. But right now, we're going to talk about the U.S. Individual's debt. So me and you, right? People in your neighborhood, everyday folks like everybody that's on today. In 2019, there was $770 billion in credit card debt. So in 2019, this is a little bit prior. This is kind of in the midst of COVID, before the shutdowns. In 2019, there was $770 billion in credit card debt. Anybody venture to guess where we are currently today? We're over $1 trillion, right? I couldn't even pause for effect, but maybe I'll do that now. But we went from $770 billion in credit card debt as people to $1 trillion is what we're currently in debt today. And by the way, do you feel like the economy's stronger today than it was 2 years ago? I don't think so. Well, the difference 2 years ago is they weren't printing money like it was going out of style. We had a ridiculous amount of money printed. Those stimulus checks, did you put them to work or did you spend them like everybody else? Well, I trust that you're here because you made some wise decisions. You took that stimulus check, you paid off some debt. Now you're in acceleration mode because that's what we're here to talk about today. Is now that we've gotten financially healthy within the MWR program, right? We've made sure that we've got that instant pay raise. We paid down debt effectively. We're bill shredding, making sure that we're not overpaying on our everyday bills. By the way, that could include your light bill. That could include your cell phone bill. If you haven't given those guys a call, if you haven't checked in to see if they can reduce your everyday bills, what are you waiting for? That's money that's going out anyways. You might as well get a reduced cost on something that you're going to use. Why not leverage the membership to all of its capabilities? So after we get financially healthy, we've got positive cash flow. What do we do now? Well, we got to get financially wealthy. And that's the program that we're going to be talking about today. And, guys, I'm so inspired to be here with you. I love what we do. And as we talk about the private reserve account, again, the world today is very different than it's been in the past. But we do have some similarities. I think for you folks that, experienced 2007 and 8, well, you're kind of getting those old wounds are opening up a little bit. And, I'm going to trust that we're going to speak to some of those old wounds. We're going to talk about how to make sure that we're navigating if there is another 2007, rather than going through it and just kind of being reactive. Because that's really what happened is people got caught just out of nowhere, right? It was, this was my father included, by the way. He was retired in 2007, lost 40% of his life savings virtually overnight. Had some real estate that he didn't understand the loans. got into some bad deals and had to give back some homes. And ultimately, not only did he lose a significant part of his real estate portfolio, he lost money inside of his 401k, and he had to go back to work 12 months after he retired. That was the story for many people, by the way. That wasn't just my father. And to be clear, my father, right, my family, we weren't born from, we didn't have the silver spoon. We weren't born from wealth. We, for the better part of my childhood, we grew up in a trailer. So I've experienced hard times just as anybody here, right? So I've seen it, we've lived it, and I've seen people that really got beat up pretty bad financially in 2007, and now we're seeing some old data in 2007 that's showing up today. Now I can't guarantee that there's going to be a crash, but my goal here today is to get you prepared. We call it preparation over prediction. Because when you're prepared for something, do you generally have a laundry list? You've got a selection of a lot more choices than if you're being reactive, right? So if I'm proactive and I've got a list of choices, when I'm reactive, those choices tend to go off because, well, I'm reactive. I'm limited on my choices. But guys, that's my goal today, is preparation over prediction. We want to prepare you for the opportunities that are going to be coming in the next couple of years, because goodness, we are going to see those. And those that are prepared for the opportunities are going to start to see some massive success, as well as they're going to be able to accelerate their wealth. Unbelievable. So as we jump into this and we talk about the 4 cornerstones of a strong financial foundation, you can see that first, we're going to talk about growth, especially in an environment to where, goodness, we've got inflation like we've never seen in a very long time. Well, they say 40, 50 years. Well, we had inflation numbers as high as 7 and 8% on some cost of goods, lumber, right? Back in COVID, there was lumber that was 4 to 6 times more expensive than it was, just a few short years. It's no secret that our money needs to outpace inflation. If money isn't growing, it's dying. And if it's sitting in a bank account, we know that it's not growing. So, today we're going to talk about how to get the benefits of growth as well as safety. If we're going to grow the money, typically most people experience what? They grow the money like my father did in 2007. He grew his portfolio over a period of time. And then, 2007 happened. And unfortunately, he didn't have a safety feature built in, and he lost 40% of his life savings. So, right, we need to have something that the strong financial foundation, the cornerstones here. We want growth, safety, as well as tax advantages. There's nothing more frustrating than taking money from a 401k and realizing that you've got to give a significant portion of that growth to what? Uncle Sam. So, tax advantages are a necessity, as well as protection. If we were to pass away, we want to make sure that the inheritors get the bulk of the resources, that money, if we can set it up in a way to where all of those resources go to our inheritors, why not? By the way, have you guys contacted Trust My Assets? Have you guys looked into what it looks like to leave and prepare and ultimately provide a legacy of trust fund babies? That's not just like a Hollywood thing, by the way. That's something that is a reality within this membership. You can have trust fund babies as well. So guys, as we get into the demographics of life and we talk about, some of the hardness that's going on out there, we are in the greatest retirement crisis in the history of the world. It's no secret. You don't have to take my word for it. It's not like I'm a rocket scientist. You can look outside your window. You can see it and hear it in the conversations of people that have been saving for 20, 30, and 40 years. It's pretty challenging today. And when we look at the coming decades, there's millions to retire into poverty. Now, how did we get there? Because the 401k is something that typically is talked about and used as one of the main sources for what? Growth, and as a retirement platform. And we've been using it for 40 years at this point, a little longer than 40 years. Now, do you guys feel like it's working or not working? Talk to your peers. It's pretty evident that people aren't retiring earlier. They're retiring much later. If it was working, wouldn't we see the reverse effect, right? We'd see people retiring earlier in their 40s and 50s rather than to their 60s, 70s, and 80s. I mean, I've met people, I'm sure you have as well, that are still working and they're in their 80s, not because they want to, but because they have to. Too frail to work and too poor to retire is the new normal. That's really our job. And my quest here today is to get you in a different thought pattern, because thoughts are reality. And that's the truth. right? If you think about, well, I'm too frail to work and I'm too poor to retire, well, then you're going to act that way out in the world. My job is to psychologically get you prepared for, well, that may be so right now. But just because that's your destination right now, it doesn't mean that you can't change your direction, right? So I'm not here to change your destination overnight, but we're certainly going to change our direction. And then we're going to start to, change that destination as well. And why did this happen? Well, let's talk about pensions and where they, ultimately where they went. Because many of you guys are well aware. I mean, my grandfather, he had a pension. My father, he had a pension as well through the city of Arizona. And, unfortunately, pensions have become really a myth at this point. There's not too many companies that offer them. You can see back in the 1980s, there was as many as 60% of companies provided pensions, and now we get to just 2016, which is a pretty far time ago. It's a long time ago at this point, and only 4% of companies now currently offer pensions, and they're typically government-backed. And even some of the government companies are now transitioning to 401ks, 457s, 403bs. And the truth about money is that let's talk about the 401k specifically, as it's been a lousy product in a financial flop. You guys see all of these different news articles. You can see that CBS News had a 60-minute segment on how retirement dreams will disappear with 401ks. Forbes.com, one of the most credible sources, right? It's a great resource for financial tips. You get to, get a bird's eye view into billionaire success. And, they talk about how your 401k has been a total scam. The retirement gamble, this was put on by pbs.org/the frontline. In my opinion, this is one of the best videos and one of the most alarming videos that you can watch. Highly recommended. But ultimately, this comes down to 3 reasons. Number 1 is stock market risk. I'm not here to say that 401ks are bad, but timing's a little bit challenging, isn't it? Well, if you don't retire during good financial times, you don't retire at all. That was my father, 2007, loses 40% of his retirement portfolio and goes back to work in 2008. I mean, again, that's pretty challenging. That's the story of many folks during that time as well. Hidden and excessive costs. Now, there are good 401ks out there. I've had some phone calls over the last couple of weeks. They're like, well, Cord, man, you really don't like 401ks. It's not that I don't like 401ks. It's, well, do you have the good kind or the bad kind? And if you have a good 401k, then that's perfect. But you also need to know ultimately where you got to have the end in mind. So if I'm putting money inside of it, what's the ultimate goal? And ultimately, what am I going to have to consider when I start to take money? Taxation. How's it going to affect my Social Security? Do I have pension income, right? You need to have all these different buckets of income, not to where, in most cases, people have 90% of their net worth in a 401k. That's not what it was intended for. When Ted Benna, when he created the 401k savings plan and the tax code, he's gone on, public media. He's got a lot of articles to where he talked about how this tax code was intended to be 10% of somebody's net worth, not 90%. But when I meet with people on a very regular basis, we find out that 90% of their money is held inside of a 401k rather than 10%, right? So we got to level out the playing field. You ever heard that saying, don't have your eggs all in one basket? Well, it's a saying for a reason. And the third reason is, of course, tax rate risk. When you think about the government, are they very good at handling balance sheets? I don't think so. And by the way, it has nothing to do with this current administration and the administrations behind. It's not left, right, or middle. They all overspend. Every single administration overspends. We're currently at $33 trillion in debt as a country. And when you think about, well, they're not very good at cutting programs, right? We saw that with their when they passed the bill to increase the debt ceiling. Right? Why didn't they just eliminate some programs? It's like, well, here's our budget. Well, instead of funding this, that, or the other, we got to cut money from these places because we overspent. It's like, well, we'll just vote in a law to where we can spend more money. That's been their history for a very long time. Indisputable. $33 trillion in debt. So if they're not going to eliminate programs to be able to help and start to pay down debts, what are they going to do? They're going to increase taxes. In your 401k, that balance is dependent on what? It's not the growth. It's not performance. Right? That's actually a misnomer. Of course, you want your 401k to perform and you want it to grow, but the balance, how much money you have in that account, has nothing to do with the total balance, and it has everything to do with the tax system at the time of the distribution. What do I mean by that? Because right now, most tax bills, right? So most tax rates, people are anywhere between 22 to 25%, state and federal, which means they're relative. They're going to pay about 25 cents on the dollar per, in tax when they take money out of a 401k. Well, what if instead of 25%, right, that 25% tax rate, it goes to 30, 40, or 50? That's a sizable difference. That's not a small difference. Right. And then you also have to work against the stock market risk of, well, I hope that I retire when the market is up versus the market being down. And I hope I take money from my 401k when the tax rates are low instead of being high. Well, the retirement gamble, right? We've already talked about the old way of thinking is using pre-tax dollars to invest in a company sponsored 401k. They want you to contribute as much as possible, so that you can receive a limited match from your employer. You can fund your retirement and pay taxes later. All right, we've kind of gone over that. It doesn't make sense. I know that a lot of people that participate in these calls, we're business owners, right? Or at least you've got your thinking cap on and you're looking at it from a business owner's point of view. If you had an agreement, let's say that you've got a business idea, right? You've got a partner that you're bringing in and you say, hey, I want to build this business with you, and I'm going to give you 20% in equity in the company, right? So we'll build it together, and then you have massive success. Let's say you make it on the Inc. 500. You guys are doing incredibly well. And he's like, man, these guys are doing so well. Instead of having 20% of the pie, I'm going to come to him and say, well, now you need to give me 30. Well, every right person in their mind would say, well, heck no, our agreement was 20. But that's the agreement that we have with whom? Uncle Sam. Because they can change the ball game at any time. And the balance in our 401k, again, has nothing to do with how much money is in it. It has everything to do with the tax system voted in at the time of your distribution. The post-pension era, it's been burned in the American psyche. But is it possible that it's exactly what you should not be doing? The world is so different, isn't it? I mean, I think about, I'm 35 at this point. Had some time on this earth, got a lot more years ahead of me. I've had the pleasure of meeting with people of all ages. I mean, really, I've had the pleasure of working specifically with baby boomers for the last 12 years in a very intimate way. And you know what they all say? It's like, well, why did they burn this in? Like, why was this kind of programmed into me? And that's for you to decide. But it's indisputable that this has been burned into the way that we look and operate typically in life, unless you go into a different sector of information. And Mr. Brian Bean, he does a great way of explaining this. He talks about there's two different sectors of information. There's the private sector of information and the public sector of information. Those that are in the private sector of information, they typically have very high net worths. That's just the facts. When you know better, you do better. When you understand tax codes, you use tax codes. When you understand trusts, you use a trust, because it's the best and most effective way to grow your money, to pass it on, and to create a legacy that's unbelievable and unreal. When you're in the public sector of information, you're typically middle America. You think that the world is against you when it's not. It's just you don't understand your power and how you can play and utilize the game, because it is a financial game, my friends. And you got to decide on what part and what part you want to play. Ignorance is not bliss, is it? Ignorance is ignorance, and you pay for it one form or another. So the new rules, everything's changing, isn't it? We want to use after-tax dollars and pay tax on the seed, not the harvest. Why do we want to pay tax on the seed versus the harvest? Well, when you're putting seeds in the ground, that's when you don't really have a lot of time, sweat, blood, and tears invested into the harvest. Once it's all bloomed and you've gone through, you've dealt with the weather, you've dealt with the crows, you've dealt with the squirrels, you've dealt with any animal imaginable that can get into the crop. That's when you've spent months and a lifetime on building a harvest. So if I had the choice of paying taxes before it's blossomed into the harvest, I mean, it's pretty obvious. So when we say stay away from your company 401k plan if they do not provide a matching contribution, I want to unpack this a little bit. Why? Because, the purpose of a 401k is to give us a benefit for working for the employer. It's kind of like their edge, right? They're one of their attraction pieces for employees. And if they're not going to match it dollar for dollar or 50 cents on the dollar, there's some that won't even match 25 cents on the dollar, which is crazy to me. Then why put your money in a system that's going to be locked up until you're 59 and a half to use it? And by the way, if you use it early, you're penalized. You got a 10% penalty. You got to pay taxes as well. It's just a hard system to create wealth with. Never send extra money to your 401k if your company will not match. Overfunding your 401k is kind of like playing Russian roulette. So we went through that. And ultimately, the goal is to what? Grow your money with zero risk, access your retirement dollars tax-free, and create a tax-free inheritance for your heirs. There's nothing more, I think about, because I've got a young family, right? So I've got a kid, and I'm thinking about, well, what's the legacy that I'm going to leave behind? The inheritance, the memories, the money, the resources. I want to make sure that 100% of my efforts go to 100% of my family, that it doesn't have to be split off and pay somebody that really has no benefit to me in life, right? I'm not against the government. I'm not an anarchist, but I do believe that we spend our money more effectively than a lot of the other programs. And I think you would agree with me. Just look out your window. I feel like I paid my share in tax dollars, probably the same as you do. Well, if you ever looked out at your road, or all the potholes covered? Because I've got a pothole right down the road that they still haven't covered. And, so we just want to make sure that the money that we're putting into, that we're creating, that inheritance goes to the right people. Now, the investment options as a whole. All right, I'm going to pause here just a minute, because I really want to kind of bring some clarity to this. Because the government has currently 3 ways that they look at investments. And you've got 3 different ways, which, of course, are going to be taxed now. And we'll get into the other 2 in just a moment. But the tax now investment options typically will include your mutual funds. Okay, so this is if you've got money inside of like a brokerage and it has no IRA, right? No, it's not inside of a tax vehicle. You're going to be paying tax on those earnings every single year. How do you know if you have a taxable account? Well, you get a love letter in the form of a 1099 saying, congratulations on your growth. You don't have to pay a portion of that in tax. Long-term capital gains, short-term capital gains, whatever the situation is. The reason why this bucket here is ineffective from a tax perspective is because I don't have the ability to roll in my gains that I had for that year, because I'm paying taxes, right? So if I had $1 turn into $2 and I'm paying, 50 cents on the dollar in the form of taxes, I'm not compounding as effectively as I could. You guys with me? That makes sense? We call this the $1 million mistake. You want to have money effectively in an account to where it's got tax advantages. The great part about the tax now bucket is, well, money is typically liquid. It's accessible, it's usable, but it's really not in a great place to grow from a tax perspective. Tax later. These are the accounts that have been serving us as people for a very long time. Were you guys aware of that right after World War II, there were tax rates as high as 94%, depending on your income? 94%. And this is right around when some of the tax deferred codes were introduced, because nobody in their right mind is going to pay 94 cents on the dollar. It's like, well, no, I'm not going to do that. So I'll defer paying taxes later, because the bet was, well, if they're at 94% today, they're going to eventually get much lower, which is where we are currently today. Most people don't know that we're at the lowest tax rates we've been in a very long time. A very long time. We've got a lot of debt, though. So where will tax rates go? This includes your 401ks, 403bs, 457s, IRAs, anything that forces you to pay taxes when you take the money out. And then, of course, you've got the tax never. This is one that I wish more people understood. Love Roth IRAs. Unfortunately, they've got annual limits. And by the way, if you make really good money as a financial couple or an individual, you're limited. You can't even put money into a Roth IRA, or you can put such low amounts that it's very difficult for it to grow over a period of time to anything sizable unless you start really young. You've got the private reserve account. It's got you don't have contribution limits. It's a tax-free vehicle. Which one would you ultimately choose? And we started off talking about 2007 and 8. So I won't throw again the salt in the wound, but the average loss in 2008 was over 40%. Now, we're not guaranteeing that there's going to be another crash, but I mean, you look at you look at the conditions economically for yourself. Do you feel like we're going to continue to trend in a positive direction? If we do, keep on doing what you're doing, right? Continue to do what you're doing financially. But if you do feel like that there's going to be some significant financial changes in the market, we'll do something about it. preparation, right? We believe in what? Preparation over, over prediction. So when you're prepared, that meets opportunities. When you've got preparation, it meets opportunities. Then what happens? That's where wealth is created. You don't have to lose 40% on your money. There's a lot of different financial strategies you can incorporate to make sure that this doesn't materialize for you. Just because others choose this, you can choose to do better, and that's why we're here today. Let's talk about the effects and the effects of risk on your retirement accounts. This is what really hit home for me. I remember as I was getting into the industry, 12 years ago. And so I've been doing this now for 12 years. And I remember this graph clear as day. They were talking about if you had $100,000 inside of an account that can lose, and let's say you lost 10% in your first year, the new balance that you're left with is $90,000, right? So I had 100,000, I lost 10%, my new balance is 90 grand. It would take us an 11.1% rate of return to get back to where we were the year prior. Well, let's kind of move forward here. What if you had a 25% loss in a single year? That means your new balance is $75,000. What rate of return would you need to get back to even 33%? So what if you had a 40% loss? You can see 66.7% is what you need in a rate of return just to get back where you were the year prior. Have you seen many 66% rate of returns in the market? I don't think so. Right. And that's one of the biggest challenges, is that when you have money that loses, well, it matters. You've got less capital, less money to earn. Right. It takes even in those years to where there's sizable returns. If I had a 25% rate of return on $50,000, it's very different than if I had a 25% rate of return on 100 grand. Right. You guys understand this. So losing money matters. And what the wealthy know that most people don't is clear, that according to the Federal Reserve, the richest 10% of Americans own half of the tax-free gains. Families in the bottom half of net worth percentiles own just 6.5% of the tax-free assets. The wealthiest 10% own half, and everybody else owns 6.5%. To find wealth, do you typically model those that are successful? That's the fastest way to get from where we currently are to having to experiencing wealth, is to model a proven system. And they're doing this over and over and over. So the 5 great reasons to start saving with the new way, the PRA. I love this acronym because it spells it out beautifully. And by the way, if you've never read this book, it is absolutely incredible. It's The Retirement Miracle by Mr. Patrick Kelly. There's also another book that I want to recommend, The Power of Zero, that's by David McKnight. It talks about the current status of the country, and he's interviewing the Comptroller General of the USA, and they talk about current pending financial crises that we have, that's coming in the next, 5 years, and it's pretty alarming. But the number one rule right here is safety. The PRA contract guarantees you will never lose money due to market declines. We've got number 2, T stands for tax-free. The money inside of your PRA will grow tax-free and can be withdrawn tax-free. Accelerated living benefits. If you need the money early, you can access it without 0 penalties, rate of returns. Not only do you have historically higher rates of return than most 401k plans, you've got access to triple compound interest. That's interest on the interest and interest on the money that you save by not paying tax on your gains. The rules of the money have changed, and nowhere is that more true within your retirement. So as we kind of spell this out, if you had $100,000 and you had an 8% market increase, that means your new balance is $108,000. Well, what happens if you were in the market and you had an 8% loss? Is that you would have $99,000 rather than $108. But what's neat about this account is you can see popped up here is that 0 is your hero. Every year you've got a return, a credit. It locks it in. So then the next year, what happens? You've got a 5% increase. You'd have 113,000 versus the traditional strategies of the ups and downs of the market. You'd have 104,328. In order to catch up to that $113,000, you need a 14% return. That's double digit. Most accounts aren't designed to get that. So as we get to the 4 cornerstones of a strong financial foundation, and we wrap up here, folks, you can see this yourself. We need to have growth, safety, tax advantages, and of course the protection. Now, what investment options have this? Well, as we kind of fast forward here, it's clear that the private reserve account is the only account that has all 4 of these cornerstones. All 4 of them. When you think about the wealthiest people that you know, do they do a very good job of growing money and passing it on to the next generation? A resounding yes. How about the Rothschilds, the Kennedys, the Vanderbilts? Are you familiar with those names? They're utilizing these systems day in and day out. Now, how do you know that you can qualify for a private reserve account? Reach out to the experts. We don't know ultimately if this is for you. There are many occasions to where we'll talk to members and say, hey, you know what? This is a fantastic account, but it's not going to fit what your needs are. But here's something else to consider. Wouldn't you want to have a GPS guide you financially? Isn't that the ultimate goal? Do most people wander around aimlessly? I mean, I kind of think about, and I use this jokingly, right? Do you remember that story in the Bible to where, well, you know what, we're kind of fast forward that. But guys, this is the only account that has all the components of a strong financial foundation. It's got growth, safety, tax advantages, and death protection. Guys, the time is now. Take control of your financial future. I thank you for your time and attention. This is something that you got me sweating. I am passionate about this. Our team is passionate about helping each person get to the next level. Because guys, where you're at right now does not have to be your future. That you can always turn it around. One of my favorite sayings is, when was the best time to plant a tree? Well, it was 20 years ago. When's the next best time? It's right now. The choice is yours. You can start today. You can start to expand and deliver information to people that can change their lives forever. Use this platform as it's intended. Impact the people. Let's make sure that we have a community that's not only thriving, but we've got, just a section of the entire U.S. that is just living an unbelievable and unreal life. What do they say? We'll see you at the top because the bottom is far too crowded. Well, thank you for your time and attention. I'm going to pass it back to you, Mr. Daryl Banks, and we'll see you next week.
Wow, Mr. Burner, I tell you, once again, the information that you deliver to us just gets us to just think for a moment exactly what Warren Buffett said. Rule number 1, never lose money. Rule number 2, refer back to rule number 1. It's so simple, guys, and we have access to this platform. Be sure to set up your consultation with our wealth experts to find out your ability to be able to get an account to get growing your money. With that being said, we want to thank you all for coming out tonight. Please refer to us next Thursday, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we bring you yet another expert from our exclusive invitation-only wealth membership. Good night, everybody.